Chapter 21. A Bayram morning and a journey into bleakness. Bayram was approaching, and Mehmed and I hurried into Istanbul for 3 days' holiday, and money in our pockets with which to buy presents for the family, as was the custom at Bayram. When we got off the boat at Galata Bridge, we automatically made for the Kapala Çarşı, a sort of covered market very famous in Istanbul. Most of the traders were Armenian or Greek, with a sprinkling of Turks amongst them, and I do not know which were the worst for cheating, the Greeks, the Armenians, or the Turks. Mehmed insisted on separating from me, telling me fussily that we would meet at a certain place at a certain time. He then went off by himself, his hands thrust into his pockets, his shut-away face oddly like the image in my mind still held of my father's face. He never liked to shop with me. My methods bored him profoundly, for I would pore over something for a very long time until I was finally persuaded into buying it by a weary trader. Mehmed bought everything with great care and never afterwards regretted a purchase as I frequently did. I went to the antiques section, where I immediately lost my heart to an old samovar, a shining, elegant thing, a reminder of lost days. I stood admiring it for so long that the owner became quite nervous as to my intentions and was too apprehensive to even cry out his wares in the usual wheedling tone. In the end, I bought a brass candlestick from my grandmother, for she had a passion for old things and knew about them in a way I could never hope to imitate. When I had paid over the price demanded, there was an absolutely small amount of money left in my pocket. I hastily tore myself from the lovely old treasures in search of something which would please my mother, and at the same time caused no heartburnings over the candlestick. I searched wildly for something to fill these requirements, and finally, in sheer despair, I bought some sort of sachet which looked absurdly small in relation to the price asked for it. However, I felt I could not bargain for a present for my mother, so bought it resignatedly. A red hair ribbon was purchased for my sister, on which I saved 10 kurush, for I had no qualms about bargaining for a present for my sister. A solid-looking comb was bought for Mehmed, which might be a useless present since he had no hair to comb, but nevertheless, the price of it was just right for the amount of money I had left in my pocket. Well pleased with myself, I sauntered to the spot we had arranged for meeting to find him there already. He accused me of tardiness, and this had so put him out that he did not utter a word to me all the way home. Sulkily he stalked along beside me, his parcels under his arm, and at the Bayezid Square he left me on some mysterious, highly secret errand. The square was crowded with late shoppers, men jauntily carrying diminutive parcels and big parcels of exciting shapes, and women stepping sedately on their heels, hurrying past the moon-faced men almost as though they feared assault. I stood at the corner of the square and looked at the crowds and the great old arch of the university that twinkled with electric lights. The twin minarets of the Bayezid Mosque shone with electric candles too, and now a few oldish people were going in to pray, for it was the hour for prayer, and I could not help remembering the old days and the crowds who had answered the call of the muezzins. From everywhere came their lost mournful cry, half drowned under the roar of the traffic, the claxons of the cars, the never-ceasing clanging of the busy trams. The guns boomed out to proclaim that now the fast could be broken, and I, like the rest of the crowd, hurried home for feasting and merrymaking. I caught up with Mehmed again at the corner of the street. He was loitering there waiting for me, and Muazzez met us at the door of the little friendly house. She pulled us into the narrow hall that smelled of a garden, so full it was of flowers put there by my mother to welcome the Bayram. We went together to the kitchen, where my mother was heating soup, an apron protecting her silk dress. We kissed her hands and handed her our presents. She looked very youthful and gay, with her face heated from the fire and tendrils of her hair falling across her forehead, and then she opened my present to her and said that the sachet was really very pretty indeed. Muazzez was less tactful. She resentedly examined her hair ribbon and remarked on the poor quality of the satin. "Red does not suit me," she said. pettishly, throwing the gay ribbon on the ground. Mehmet said in disgust when he saw the comb. What am I expected to do with a comb? Altogether, there was no pleasing him. I hoped to fare better with my grandmother. We judged the time for her to have finished with her praying, for no loud rumbling noises were coming from the salon, so we went upstairs to find her. She was just rising swiftly, and her first words were, "Now my heart is comfortable, for I have just prayed for all our dead." We kissed her hands, and I noticed that for this Bayram, all her rings sparkled, and a great emerald lay glinting across her breast. We handed our presents, and when she saw the candlestick, she said to me, "You have a very rare genius for knowing how to please people." And we all burst out laughing. Mehmed showed his comb, and my sister thrust forward the offensive hair ribbon. My grandmother's eyes twinkled, and she said that some were very hard to please, but that for herself she was happy only in being alive. She set Muazzez to prepare the table, handing out snowy damask and silver, which shone brighter than the lighted lamps. Crystal glasses were set under the damask and wine in a carafe, and I teased my grandmother, telling her that no good Muslim would drink wine. She shook her head sadly, said she knew well enough she was not a good person, but that nevertheless, surely the God did not begrudge her a glass of wine with her dinner. I looked about the room, at the high gleam on old furniture, at the flowers massed droopingly in dark corners, at the silver bowl of early roses, which hung their tender heads in the centre of the table, and I was glad to be home for this Bayram, proud that the spirit of my family had not died. The next morning, Mehmed and I were sent to the mosque to pray. We went to the little mosque my father and my grandfather had attended when we were children, the mosque which stood near the burned blackened skeleton of our old house. And too, we went there from custom, for that mosque was associated with my family, and on a Bayram morning it was unthinkable to go elsewhere. After prayers were over, we stood on the steps of the mosque, and the little garden was thick with wild flowers and people, and the tall trees shadowed the lush green grass. The Imam issued the traditional bonbons in Turkish delight. Mehmed and I respectfully saluted the old man. One of them came over to me and said, "Are you Husnu's son?" I replied that this was so, and he looked Mehmed and me, and I saw memories slipping a long way back. "I remember your father," he said, "but you are not like him. This one here," touching Mehmed, "now he is very like him indeed, very like." He paused a moment, struggling with the memories that crowded the old brain. "Your father," he said heavily, "used to come to this mosque to pray. I remember him when he was quite a small boy. He used to come here with your grandfather." "Ah, well," he sighed, "that is a long time ago. You could not know of that." He patted my shoulder with a frail, gentle hand. "You are a fine boy," he said. "God bless you." He pottered away from us, muttering to himself, and I saw him young again and upstanding, with perhaps a child on either hand, and watching the approach of the small boy who was to become my father, with the young man who was to become my grandfather. And I clearly heard their voices and felt the tug of the impatient small boy. I thought how sad a thing is age, and I wondered if that old man and all other old people felt this same sadness. What did they think when they saw their withered cheeks that were once smooth, their dimmed eyes that were once bright? Did they sometimes wish for death to carry them swiftly from the ancient bodies before they could see any further cruel encroachment? We went home to feasting and merrymaking, but before the feasting a certain ritual had to be observed. My grandmother had to seat herself, my mother going to her to kiss her hands as a sign of her respect for her greater age. My grandmother would respond by kissing my mother's cheeks, then motioning to her to sit beside her. Now it was my turn to pay my respects to the women of the family. Next Mehmed, last of all Muazzez, for she was the youngest. At the conclusion of the little ceremony, could the serious business of the day begin. Muazzez handed sweets on the tray that had never known any other duty. My mother served liqueurs to drink each other's health, and everyone sat a little stiffly in their new clothes. Later in the morning, Bekçi Baba came to the street. He was accompanied by the man who played the big drum and another who played the clarinet. The man with the drum had gaily coloured handkerchiefs tied all about the drum, the symbol for all the tips Bekçi Baba had received from the various houses in the district. My mother handed a small blue handkerchief to me, with money tied in one corner, and I handed this in turn to Bekçi Baba in appreciation of how well he had looked after us throughout the year. It was tied on the drum with the other handkerchiefs, and the little group then called at the house next door, and a crowd of children flew after them, shouting ribaldly. Then it was the turn of the famous local fireman. The dustmen came too, and money was given to all of them. Local children played near the house, and we tossed exotically wrapped sweets to them, watching them eagerly scrambling for them. After luncheon, neighbours called, and Mehmet and I decided to take Muazzez to Yeşilköy, to the sea. Yeşilköy, Green Village, is a pretty suburb of Istanbul and very popular in the summer months. The little local trains were packed to capacity. Although Muazzez protested of discomfort, Mehmet and I were perfectly satisfied to stand in the corridor amongst the dribbling, crying babies and the hot, sticky children. At Yeşilköy, we hired a rowing boat, but the Marmara was rough and Muazzez inclined to look suddenly white about the nostrils, so we took her on land again, where she soon recovered. We climbed a hilly village street, quiet and cool with birds singing behind high garden walls. The old grey houses stood back coolly amidst their flower beds, and the striped sunblinds mocked the early heat of the spring sunlight. Down a wide gravel road, tree-lined and tranquil, we walked and up the hill to the casino, which was less than 100 feet above sea level. We chose a table overlooking the sweep of the Marmara, a table with a bare, hot top, partially shaded by acacia trees, and because it was Bayram, Turkish music was played by the orchestra, and a singer sang sadly of her love who was gone. When the waiter came, I ordered pastries and sickly chocolate cakes and iced coffee, topped with mouth-melting creme sante. I ordered recklessly, for my mother had slipped money into my pocket before we left home. Muazzez, in her white, soft dress and the gay blue ribbons trussed her hair, was in seventh heaven of delight, trying to pretend that she was older than her meagre 11 years. Still, I see that day before my eyes, and the moment I realized that my sister was beautiful, for her eyes that day were the mad, mad blue of the Marmara, catching and matching their mood to the gaiety about her, and her young laughter tinkled joyously. We returned late from the casino, glad to rest weary young limbs in easy chairs, and there was a languor, pallor about my sister, which was half childish, half sensual, and I realized with a little wondering shock that she was growing up. Back to Kulalai again, the Bayram over, and the surging happiness of meeting old friends again. But on the 4th of May that year, certain of us were transferred to the military school at Tokat, in the north of Anatolia, for a year and a half, and great was our regret to leave Kulalai for such a long time. Mehmed was given permission to see me off, and he waved madly, growing smaller and smaller as the boat pulled away from the shore. We slid past Kulalai, and I looked nostalgically back to it. Soon we had reached Galata, and this time it was Istanbul to which I looked back, mysterious under the evening haze, and I thought that it would be hard to say goodbye to Istanbul, my own city. Most fair it seemed against the sky, like a lovely jewel in the Bosphore. Down the darkening Bosphore we sailed, and still I looked back to the dim face of Istanbul. Presently a friend pulled me by the arm. "Stop dreaming," he laughed. "Come and eat something. Packed extra things for you because I knew you would not remember." I laughed too, for it was true that I had not remembered. I gladly accepted the bread, black olives, and hard-boiled eggs which he had proffered. Soon we slid into the long length of the Black Sea, and the Bosphore with all its memories lay far behind, and one bade it adieu, as regretful, as sentimental an adieu as though one would never again return to its blue waters. That night we slept on deck, only our seniors being privileged to sleep in the comparative half comfort of below. We on deck, huddled beneath our overcoats and tried to sleep to the roll and lurch of the uneasy boat, conscious of the keen winds that blew from Russia, even though it was May and we had left summer behind in Kulalai. The next day we arrived at Zonguldak, a dirty, dusty coal mining city, its outline drab and somehow depressing, and everywhere covered with a fine tin pall of coal dust. The buildings beside the wharf looked infinitely dreary, all of them coal begrimed, only a few yellow houses on the hill to add a note of relief. These houses looked oddly incongruous and out of place here amongst all the drabness, having an air of temporaneousness, insolently clinging to the side of the hill. There was something infinitely sorrowful in the grey roofs against the skyline. We were desolate to think we had to spend 12 hours here whilst the captain of the ship took on supplies of coal, water, and other commodities. Our next port of call was Inebolu. We stopped about a mile offshore, for Inebolu was no harbour. It stood like a picture in its green frame of trees and the high mountain forest behind it. Many rowing boats were coming out to us, and the soft day was still and calm, and a brilliant sun shone on the pink and white houses of the little town, perhaps giving it a false beauty that would nevertheless sparkle in the memory. The rowing boats came up to us, and we leaned over the rails and watched. First came a fussy little customs boat flying the Turkish flag, and a man jumped out and ran with remarkable agility up the ladder of our boat. The other rowing boats carried more passengers for us, or had come to collect passengers wishing to disembark. Many of the little boats sold bread and olives and hard-boiled eggs and cream cheese. Their shouts mingled with the talk and laughter of the passengers and struck gaiety from that still summer sea that lay quiet like grass, and far away on the shore we could hear the morning noises of Inebolu. Some of the passengers let down large handkerchiefs and strings and bought foodstuffs from the boat. The seller would make a deft package of the handkerchief, the passenger hauling it up, and money would be flung down to the grinning boatman. Sometimes arguments would arise, the hoarse, bellowing voice of the boatman swearing by Allah that the price he asked was below the price he himself paid for whatever it was that was under dispute. We left Inebolu to the cries of the vendors, the ribald songs of the boatmen, and gradually the voices grew fainter, and our view of pretty Inebolu dimmed, until after a while it was just a green blur many miles behind us. Because we had not been ashore, we grew sentimental about the town, and wondered what had lain behind the pink and white facades of the houses. The formal green pattern of the trees had concealed what romantic things. Now the scenery was sheer beauty. For a long time after Inebolu, we hugged the shoreline, and the big mountains of Anatolia smiled and frowned upon us according to the changing position of the sun. The mountains were covered with thick foliage, and the natural fortress of Anatolia was against our Black Sea neighbours. Sometimes we saw a tiny shore village, a huddle of small mud houses only. We wondered how they lived there, so remote from civilization of any kind. And sometimes a village clung to the rocky slopes of the mountains, and we tried to imagine the rough, primitive life of the inhabitants. Presently, the shoreline curved away from us, and the following crying seagulls left us, and we were out in the open sea again. That night the sea was rough and cold, and many of us were sick, and the journey became a nightmare through the dark, with the hiss of the foaming water in our wake, and the torrents of rain drove those of us on deck to seek shelter. When we arrived at Samson, the rain had ceased, but the weather was still cold, the grey, angry sea still choppy under a leaden sky. Samson is a big city, the most important Turkish city on the Black Sea coast, and it reminded me in a vague sort of way of Kadıköy on the Asian side of Istanbul. Again our boat stopped a mile or so offshore, and motorboats chugged and battled across the huge waves, but they could not reach us, and our captain roared through a megaphone, telling them to go back until the sea was calmer. 5 hours we waited, cold and sick, and longing for this nightmare journey to end. Finally the motorboats were able to reach us. They rocked like toys in the grip of the breakers which now and then threatened to entirely submerge them. I was one of the first down the swaying greasy ladder, and I jumped dizzily into the motorboat to await the others. The waves tossed us furiously up and down, and the horizon reeled and waved and was sometimes lost from sight altogether. I was sick continuously. That night I slept like a log in a narrow bed in the Samson military hospital, and the next morning we left for Tokat and the end of our journey. Buses appeared for us and we piled in anyhow, and off we started with a great roar and a cloud of dust. We rushed at terrifying pace out of the city, the buses swaying and the drivers leaning over the wheels like fanatics in a team of racing cars. In the early afternoon we came to a small village, and we crowded around the village pump to wash the dust off our faces and to drink avidly from the bitter tasting water. We sat down to eat the bread and cheese the hospital authorities had given us that morning, and the mongrel curs of the village sniffed us curiously, and the shy wild children came to stare, their fingers in their mouths, ready to fly at our slightest movement. On again we started, refreshed after our food and the rest, and once again ready to brave the perils of the eccentric bus. For hours we ran by the banks of a cool brown river, and the fir forests ran steeply up on either side of us. Occasionally we would meet a cowherd leading his cows to his village, and always he would look curiously at us, dour and dark-skinned with sullen eyes. The cows would bellow fearfully at the frightful apparition of the snorting bus. Evening fell tender and green, and presently the moon rose behind the hills, climbing steadily up the sky, high and silver and remote, and shadows stole out on the silver road, and the fir forests were bathed in radiance. We arrived at Amasya, that old historical city famous for its luscious apples, that have a smell like no other apples in all the world, and are red and shining and delicate to taste. The apple orchards began about an hour before we reached the city itself, and the moon shone tenderly on the young curled fronds of the blossom. We might have been on an enchanted road, so fairy-like it was, so unreal, with the never-ending foam of pink beauty. When we reached the big rock fortress, the slender charm of minarets came into view. We halted by the wooden bridge on the Yeşil Irmak, a river which flows through the centre of the city. Once again we went to the military hospital, where we were fed and given beds for the night. Our number, however, very seriously disorganized their resources and very nearly their hospitality. We left Amasya the following morning, and still the apple orchards continued for some time. When they abruptly ended, we were in a wilderness of dusty road, flat, uninteresting, desolate meadows on either side of us. "Tokat soon," shouted our driver encouragingly, and I, who was the nearest the apology of the door, leaned out and saw the grey stone of a fortress appearing over the tops of some trees. Over a bridge that forded a shallow river we ran, and now houses began to appear, little houses set in wild gardens. The road had narrowed, and the dust rose from it like a cloud, invading the bus and covering us with a film of white. We turned into the main street, a few straggling houses marking it beginning, and small shops came into view. Children and dogs lurked in the street, and our klaxon made a great noise as we tore past with no regard for life, human or otherwise, and the dogs yelped in terror. Onto a newly built stone road we ran, and we saw a big dark huddle of buildings on a hill. It was the military school, and we had reached our journey's end at last. We sighed at the unrelieved bleakness and thought of Cool Alive fronting the Bosphor.